Okay, Ben Campbell asks an R2D2 question. He loved the BB-8 video this week. He's a professor of engineering and he's building an R2D2 as an engineering club project with his students. Nicely done. It will likely be a 1 decade build rather than a 1 day build. Heard. Since it's a project you've done before, I'll ask the question that you asked Laura and Markland about the BB-8. What advice do you have for R2D2 builders since you've been in the trenches? And additionally, are there suggestions for functionality that you would love to see in R2D2 as a challenge for my students? Advice: don't get too precious about R2. Don't get too precious about R2 from a measurement standpoint or even a dirty standpoint. Um, there were 6 original aluminum R2s, from my understanding, built for Star Wars New Hope, built by NORAC Engineering. They are brazed together out of mild, soft aluminum. They're like pieces of jewelry, and they are roughly similar to each other, but they are not identical. If you measure 5 different R2D2s that they have in the archives at Lucasfilm, you will get 5 different measurements for everything that you're measuring. That's the reality. So there is, while the R2D2 builders group does have a set of measurements that are the measurements that I followed because I helped them gather those measurements, they are idealized, but they're not perfect. So don't kill yourself worrying about the body diameter plus or minus a 16th of an inch, or whether this thing is 40 thou bigger than that thing. You can relax on a lot of that stuff. Secondly, my biggest advice is so many R2D2s that I see are way too clean. R2, I appreciate an as delivered R2D2, but you know what? The Star Wars universe is not an as delivered universe. It is a heavily modified, it is a mod culture that is the Star Wars universe. And R2 is no exception. And he should feel like that. He should be filthy. Um, Oh, actually, I can give you a piece of R2 weathering advice. Hold on. There we go. This Streaks and Tips. Streaks and Tips. This is a temporary hair color. And it comes in black and in brown. I think brown is the main. Black and brown are the 2 main R2 stains, leaning heavily more towards brown. Streaks and Tips is a film industry staple because, well, it used to be, because if you're working with an incandescent light bulb, which don't exist anymore, it's really hot. And if you want to lower the value on that light, you'd put some gels or ND or a flag in front of that. Or you just pop off the Streaks and Tips and you could spray the light bulb directly because it's like temperature independent. This stuff doesn't burn. It's also fantastic for weathering stuff because you can spray it on and then wipe it off, and then rubbing alcohol pulls it off. And I'll guarantee you that all the screen used R2s have tons of weathering using this stuff. You will put it on, you will think it's too heavy, you'll freak out, you'll start pulling it off, and then you will notice that it starts looking amazing. That is the same process I have every time I weather something. I'm like, oh, I've overdone it. Let's pull it. Oh, wait, actually, it looks great. When I was finishing my R2, it took me 5 years. When I was finally finishing my R2, we had in the little group of us that built our R2s had made a skirt. That's the part that goes underneath R2's main barrel body. There's this little tapered skirt down there that the third leg comes out of. And the skirt, we had made a master pattern for it, and we had made a silicone mold for it. And for the life of me, when I got to that part of the build, I could not find the mold. It was totally gone. And I thought, well, I'm just dead in the water. I can't finish this. And then I realized, dude, you're a model maker. You could replicate that part in probably 2 hours. And I did, using like MDF and styrene. And as I was like doing this, I was like getting really precise about this thing. And I realized R2 is beat to hell. I don't need to be super precious about every edge being perfect because it's not about that. Sure, don't get me wrong, like obsessing over every corner and every edge and every piece is a delightful enterprise if you have the time and energy for it. And there are a few R2D2s out there where every single door opens and shuts, remote control with just incredibly elaborate drive, computer, and interface systems in them. And those have their place. I'm just never going to have the patience to do one of those for myself. But you also asked for what would be suggestions for functionality. There are a lot of wonderful designs out there for the type of hinge that allows one of R2D2's doors to open and close. So there are people that have made STL files that hold a servo and have a place where you can drop a pin and print these 3 parts that allow one of the doors to open and close. Designing one of those mechanisms is not that difficult, and it's a terrific project. In fact, I put several actual doors into a couple of hero R2D2s, and we never went to so much trouble at ILM. We literally would take these like little skinny like jewelry box hinges, these little continuous hinges that were very small, and we would like cut away a part of the door and put the hinge in there and JB welded on both sides and then spray paint it white. Just like R2D2's doors on the real things have visible hinges. You just never notice it because usually it's too far away. I appreciate that the R2D2 builders out in the world hold to a higher standard of cleanliness on the doors. I just think it's funny that the hero ones never got around to that. I have no idea about the episodes 7, 8, and 9 R2D2s. So my knowledge ends at episode 3 in terms of like the practical realities of how they filmed with R2. A door mechanism. That is absolutely a terrific project to 3D print and implement. And it is totally doable as a standalone and yet easy to understand how it fits within the whole. Let's see here. DevLegion asks a question that I really like. They say, I started on the journey of learning how to make 3D models fairly recently, something I was never able to do thanks to undiagnosed ADHD, thankfully now under control. All of this means that I've never managed to develop the skills that sit behind project management. My biggest issues right now are keeping focus and the creativity going when trying to get a project finished, and at the same time, burning out on the project because I'm pushing myself so hard to get it finished. Yeah. So here's the question. What do you do when you start struggling with a project and start getting artist creativity block? And how do you step back from the project when it gets a bit too much? It's a great question. I really appreciate that you have finally diagnosed your ADHD. I would have been probably diagnosed as being mildly ADHD when I was a kid. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you've got it under control. I don't know what method you're using, but all the people I know who have ADHD and have found mitigation methods for it have been really happy about that. I think the hidden thing in finding a mitigation technique for ADHD is also realizing that it's not your fault. That that our brains are all wired in different, interesting, strange ways. Sorry about that. That our brains are all wired in different, interesting, and strange ways, and we don't always have control over how they're wired. We just have some control over how we react to how they're wired. Between stimulus and response is all of our free will. Um, the fact is, I do totally struggle with getting creativity block. I've got a build right now uh, that I'm like 90% through with, but the last 10% is going to be kind of a grueling slog, and I'm not sure if it's going to be right yet. And I've been sort of like, I've spent about a week doing other things while this thing sits there kind of taunting me. What do you do when you start struggling with a project and start getting creativity block? I do all sorts of different things. First off is to not take it personally. That's the first thing. It's really not to take it personally. It's not a failing on our part. It's not a failing on your part. It is part of the process that your enthusiasm comes and goes in waves. Your desire to work comes and goes in waves. Yes, we are not particles. We are waves. We are not static objects. We are things in motion. Mary Carr has a thing she said, which I loved. She wrote Liar's Club. She's a wonderful memoirist and teacher. And when asked about writer's block, I've told this story on the channel several times. She was asked about writer's block, and she said, when I don't know what to write, I sit at my desk and I copy other people's work in longhand. She says, my fidelity at the desk is to be writing. It doesn't matter if I'm writing my own work or somebody else's. It's just that I'm going through the practice of doing it. And I really, really get that. So I'm telling you my personal experience with a piece I'm still not sure how to finish is I put it away about a week ago, and I've been doing everything but working on it since then. I've been doing some shop infrastructure. I've been doing some small builds. I've been doing some medium-sized builds. I've been doing some carpentry. I've also been building a desk for my office at home. And all of those have been sort of ways in which I'm not dealing with this half-finished project, but that's also letting it percolate. So the other question that would naturally come after that, I would imagine, would be, well, how long do you let it percolate? And like, for me, sometimes that can be years. It's rarely years, but it can be. On this one, I've already shot 90% of it, and I got to get it in the can. I got to come to a conclusion for it. Otherwise, we've got all this footage that someone's going to edit most of. That doesn't work as a business model. So I will have to go back in and just sort of start working. Yeah, that's what will happen in the next phase of this project. I still don't know what my point of view is as to how this thing should finally look when it's done, but I know that the next step is me taking it apart and doing some of these pieces, these things that I know I want to do to it, and seeing how I feel about those. But because I'm in this part where like that is a lot of work to do that, and I'm not sure of what the reward is, there's a lot of inertia in me towards going towards that. But I do have the ability because I'm a professional, because I do have the ability to like push myself into doing a build I don't necessarily want to do. And that is a really good practice to get into doing. The hardest place for a lot of people as beginning makers is I have invested so much time in this, yet should I just stop working on it, scrap it, and start again from scratch? Starting again from scratch is one of the best skills you could possibly gain as a maker of things. And again, maker means musician, coder, writer, seamstress, whatever it is, professional driver. Like, if your point of view is being used to make something from nothing, you are a maker. And when we make things, we often get into a situation where we're throwing good money after bad, and there's a point to pull the plug and start again from scratch. And I can think of few things that are better to do as a creative practice than scrapping your project and starting over from scratch, because you know you're not going to get it all the way there. I actually just did a build in which that happened at the very end of it. And look, the last thing is, there's an implication when you talk about artist creativity block and how do you step back from the project when it gets a bit too much. The implication there is that there's a period of time that's too long to step away from the project, right? And I'm here to say there's no amount of time that's too long. So go ahead and go a little easy on yourself if that thing doesn't get done. Move on to the next one. You may end up finishing a project a year from now that tells you what you needed to know about the project you didn't finish. That totally happens to me in this room. But yeah, go easy on yourself. Like that's my best advice in terms of being creative and exploring one's creativity. Is self-forgiveness is a really, really important one. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support us even further, you can by becoming a tested member. Details are, of course, below, but it includes all sorts of perks, and we're building them all the time. You get advanced word and behind-the-scenes photos of some of our projects, questions. You get to ask direct questions during my live streams, and we have some members-only videos, including the Atom real-time series of unbroken, unedited shots of me working here in the shop. They are weirdly meditative. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you on the next one.